Hi, I'm just going to do this really quickly. I don't have time for a second take, so it's kind of warts and all. At the same time, I think this is going to be a little bit of a longer one, a longer video. I want to read to you a section of this book that I've been reading that I should not actually be reading right now. I have so much schoolwork to do, but for some reason I've found myself here. But with this, I think that why I'm excited to read this to you is that it kind of went back to my schoolwork. So I wanted to share it and just have you hear this thing that I found really exciting. Also, I need to practice reading out loud anyway. I tend to stumble, so I apologize if that happens here. So basically what I'm reading to you is the second book in a fantasy series. It's a little like steampunk. It's set in the Napoleonic era, and instead of there being like steam-powered computers, it's an alternate world where there are dragons. Everything else seems to be pretty much the same. I mean, even some of the historical references are the same. Like I said, Napoleon, Admiral Lord Nelson is in it, and I just wanted to share with you this section. It's like the two characters are Temeraire, who's this dragon, who's like basically it's like we're getting his life story. This dragon. The first scene, he hatches out of an egg, and we watch him go through. The last book was kind of him as a child, and what seems to be happening here is a lot of the that kind of teenage identity related stuff that's really juicy, and why I feel like this relates back to my class. So there's just been a big battle at sea. Temeraire has just killed a sea serpent who was about to destroy the ship, and his friend, the person who is kind of like his human kind of I don't know how to describe it. I guess counterpart, maybe owner. You'll see why it's gray here. Are talking about what happened that day, and it gets into all of Temeraire's issues about who he is and what's going on. And I just wanted to share. Okay. Still barefoot, Lawrence, that's the friend's name, took some coffee and ship's biscuit when Roland brought it him, but stayed by Temeraire, who remained subdued and without appetite. Lawrence tried to coax him out of the low spirits, worried that perhaps he had taken some deeper injury, not immediately apparent, but Temeraire said dully, "No, I am not hurt at all, nor sick. I'm perfectly well." "Then what has distressed you so?" Lawrence at length asked, tentatively. "You did so very well today, and saved the ship." "All I did was kill her. I do not see it as anything to be proud of," Temeraire said. "She was not an enemy, fighting us for some cause. I think she only came because she was hungry, and then I suppose we frightened her with the shooting, and that is why she attacked us. I wish I could have made her understand and leave." Lawrence stared. It had not occurred to him that Temeraire might not have viewed the sea serpent as the monstrous creature it seemed to him. "Temeraire, you cannot think that beast anything like a dragon," he said. "It had no speech nor intelligence. I dare say you are right that it came looking for food, but any animal can hunt." "Why should you say such things?" Temeraire said. "You mean that she did not speak English, or French, or Chinese. But she was an ocean creature. How ought she have learned any human languages if she had not been tended by people in the shell? I would not understand them myself otherwise, but that would not mean I did not have intelligence." "But surely you must have seen she was quite without reason," Lawrence said. "She ate 4 of the crew and killed 6 others, men, not seals, and plainly not dumb beasts. If she were intelligent, it would have seemed inhuman, uncivilized," he amended, stumbling over his choice of words. "Still, no one has ever been able to tame a sea serpent. Even the Chinese do not say differently." You may as well say that if a creature will not serve people and learn their habits, it is not intelligent, and had just as well be killed, Temeraire said, his ruff quivering. He had lifted his head, stirred up. Not at all, Lawrence said, trying to think of how he could give comfort. To him the lack of sentience in the creature's eyes had been wholly obvious. I am saying only that if they were intelligent, they would be able to learn to communicate, and we would have heard of it. After all, many dragons do not choose to take on a handler and refuse to speak with men at all. It does not happen so very often, but it does, and no one thinks dragons unintelligent for it, he added, thinking he had chanced on a happy example. But what happens to them if they do? Temeraire said. What should happen to me if I were to refuse to obey? I do not mean a single order. What if I did not wish to fight in the corps at all? So far, this had all been general. The suddenly narrower question startled Lawrence, giving the conversation a more ominous cast. Fortunately, there was little work to be done with so light a spread of sail. The sailors were gathered on the forecastle, gambling with their grog rations, and intent on their game of dice. The handful of aviators remaining on duty were talking together softly at the rail. There was no one likely to overhear, for which Lawrence was grateful. Others might misunderstand and think Temeraire unwilling, even disloyal in some way. For his own part, he could not believe there was any real risk of Temeraire's choosing to leave the corps and all his friends. He tried to answer calmly. Feral dragons are housed in the breeding grounds very comfortably. If you chose, you might live there also. There is a large one in the north of Wales, on Cardigan Bay, which I understand is very beautiful. And if I did not care to live there, but wished to go somewhere else? But how would you eat? Lawrence said. Herds which could feed a dragon would be raised by men and their property. If men have penned up all the animals and left none wild, I cannot think it reasonable of them to complain if I take one now and again, Temeraire said. But even making such allowance, I could hunt for fish. What if I chose to live near Dover, and fly as I liked, and eat fish, and did not bother anyone's herds? Should I be allowed? Too late, Lawrence saw he had wandered into dangerous ground, and bitterly regretted having led the conversation in this direction. He knew perfectly well Temeraire would be allowed nothing of the sort. People would be terrified at the notion of a dragon living loose among them, no matter how peaceable the dragon might be. The objections to such a scheme would be many and reasonable, and yet from Temeraire's perspective, the denial would represent an unjust curtailment of his liberties. Lawrence could not think of how to reply without aggravating his sense of injury. Temeraire took this silence for the answer it was, and nodded. If I would not go, I should be put in chains again and dragged off, he said. I would be forced to go to the breeding grounds, and if I tried to leave, I would not be allowed, and the same for any other dragon. So it seems to me, he added grimly, a suggestion of a low, growling anger beneath his voice, that we are just like slaves. Only there are fewer of us, and we are much bigger and dangerous, so we are treated generously where they are treated cruelly, but we are still not free. Good God, that is not so, Lawrence said, standing up, appalled, dismayed at his own blindness as much as the remark. Small wonder if Temeraire had flinched from the storm chains, if such a train of thought had been working through his imagination before now, and Lawrence did not believe that it could be the result solely of the recent battle. No, it is not so. Wholly unreasonable, Lawrence repeated. He knew himself inadequate to debate with Temeraire on most philosophical grounds, but the notion was inherently absurd, and he felt he must be able to convince Temeraire of the fact, if only he could find the words. It is as much to say that I am a slave, because I am expected to obey the orders of the Admiralty. If I refused, I would be dismissed the service and very likely hanged. That does not mean I am a slave. But you have chosen to be in the Navy and the Corps, Temeraire said. You might resign, if you wished, and go elsewhere. Yes, but then I should have to find some other profession to support myself, even if I did not have enough capital to live off if I did not have enough capital to live off the interest. And indeed, if you did not wish to be in the corps, I have enough to purchase an estate somewhere in the north, or perhaps Ireland, and stock the grounds. You might live there exactly as you liked, and no one could object. Lawrence breathed again as Temeraire mulled this over. The militant light had faded a little from his eyes, and gradually his tail ceased its restless mid-air twitching, and coiled again into a neatly spiraled heap upon the deck, the curving horns of his ruff lying more easily against his neck. 8 bells rang softly, and the sailors left their dice game, the new watch coming on deck to put out the last handful of lights. Ferris came up the dragon deck stairs, yawning, and a handful of fresh crewmen still rubbing the sleep from their eyes. Balesworth led the earlier watch below, the men saying, "Good night, sir, good night," Temeraire, as they went by, many of them patting Temeraire's flank. "Good night, gentlemen," Lawrence answered, and Temeraire gave a low, warm rumble. The men may sleep on the deck if they like, Mr. Tripp," Purbeck was saying, his voice carrying along from the stern. The ship's night settled upon her, the men gladly dropping along the forecastle, heads pillowed on coiled hawsers and rolled-up shirts, all darkness but for the solitary stern lantern, winking far at the other end of the ship, and the starlight. There was no moon, but the Magellanic clouds were particularly bright, and the long cloudy mass of the Milky Way. Presently silence fell. The aviators also had disposed of themselves along the larboard railing, and they were again as nearly alone as they might be on board. Lawrence sat down once more, leaning against Temeraire's side. There was a waiting quality to Temeraire's silence. At length Temeraire said, "But if you did," as if there had been no break in the conversation, although not with the same heat of anger as before, "if you purchased an estate for me, that would still be your doing and not mine. You love me, and would do anything you could to ensure my happiness. But what of a dragon like poor Levitas, with a captain of rank and sort, who did not care for his comfort? I do not understand what precisely capital is, but I am sure I have none of my own, nor any way of getting it." He was at least not so violently distressed as before, but rather now sounded weary and a little sad. Lawrence said, "You do have your jewels, you know. The pendant alone is worth some 10,000 pounds, and it was a clear gift. No one could dispute that it is your own property in law." Temeraire bent his head to inspect the piece of jewelry, the breastplate which Lawrence had purchased for him with much of the prize money for the Amity, the frigate which had carried his egg. The platinum had suffered some small dents and scratches in the course of the journey, which remained because Temeraire would not suffer to be parted from it long enough for them to be sanded out, but the pearl and sapphires were as brilliant as ever. "So this is what capital is, then? Jewels? No wonder it is so nice. But, Lawrence, that makes no difference. It was still your present, after all, not something which I won for myself. I suppose no one has ever thought of offering dragons a salary or prize money. It is no lack of respect, I promise you, only that money does not seem to be of much use to dragons. It is of no use because we are not permitted to go anywhere, or do as we like, and so have nothing to spend it upon," Temeraire said. "If I had money, I am sure I still could not go to a shop and buy more jewels or books. We are even chided for taking our food out of the pen when it suits us. But it is not because you are a slave that you cannot go where you like, but because people would naturally be disturbed by it, and the public good must be consulted," Lawrence said. "It would do you no good to go into town and to a shop if the keeper was fled before you came. It is not fair that we should thus be restricted by others' fears, when we have not done anything wrong. You must see it is so, Lawrence." "No, it is not just," Lawrence said, reluctantly. "But people will be afraid of dragons no matter how they are told it is safe. It is plain human nature, foolish as it may be, and there is no managing around it. I am very sorry, my dear." He laid his hand on Temeraire's side. "I wish I had better answers for your objections. I can only add to these that whatever inconveniences society may impose upon you, I would no more consider you a slave than myself, and I will always be glad to serve you in overcoming these as I may." Temeraire huffed out a low sigh, but nudged Lawrence affectionately, and drew a wing down more closely about him. He said no more on the subject, but instead asked for the latest book, a French translation of the Arabian Nights, which they had found in Cape Town. Lawrence was glad enough to be able to thus escape, but uneasy. He did not think he had been very successful in the task of reconciling Temeraire to a situation with which Lawrence had always thought him well satisfied. That's all I have. I just thought it was really great. There's a lot of things in there that, like I say, jibe against what I've been learning in class, and I felt a little rewarded for having gone through that and found issues of race and feminism actually discussed in this context, and I thought it was nicely done, and it's one of the reasons that I find fantasy so valuable, is that it takes things out of the context that we know them as and can give you a chance to talk about these deeper issues without it being about something that you may already have feelings about one way or the other. So, thanks for listening.